Welcome to the Shit You Should Wipe podcast with me, Dr. Debbie, where I teach you how to wipe the shit in your life and on your mind that's holding you back without having to turn your life upside down, become a completely different person, or burn old bridges, but simply by potty training your brain and bringing more you into your life. I promise it's not rocket science, it's just mental hygiene and you can do it too. Hello, dear wipers. So this week I'm going a bit feminist on you and I'm going to talk about a controversial topic and word, the patriarchy. But first, I want to share with you that this is actually the third time I'm trying to record this episode. And the first two times it stopped recording about, I think, 5 to 10 minutes in, which is extremely frustrating, and I couldn't really figure out why. Now, the cheeky minds might say, well, maybe it's a sign of the universe that you shouldn't record this episode or something along those lines. And I'm not gonna lie, my brain did go there. It's also been very interesting to notice, I'm going to say my procrastination, although I don't really like this word. I'm going to call it the resistance I had to record this episode because I know it's a controversial topic. But I'm sharing this with you because, as I shared in my social media posts, doing this podcast is also an experiment for me. So part of the experiment is to notice where I'm comfortable, where I'm less comfortable, and to notice the resistance and get curious about it. So anyway, hopefully, third time's a charm. Is that what you say? Yeah. Hopefully this is the right one. So today's topic is the patriarchy. But if you're a man, please don't just leave yet, because this episode is largely dedicated to you. Here's why. I remember when I started talking about the patriarchy to my husband, especially the first time, I remember he felt very attacked. Like, I didn't do anything. And I recently heard an interview of Ben Nevers, a French YouTuber, who published a book on masculinity and hypersensitivity. I believe it's called Je ne suis pas viril, which means I'm not virile. And he also said in that interview that he felt very put off by the word patriarchy at first, but he now uses it. And I think it is because when we say the patriarchy, what we really mean and should say is the patriarchal world culture. This is a phrase coined by Mama Gina. She's author of several books, including one that's called Pussy, which I highly recommend. Or we could call it the patriarchal system, which is, I believe, what Ben Nevers uses in French. And so when I talk about the patriarchy, I'm talking about the system, not the men. Because the truth is, the system affects both the majority of men and women. And, well, I hope my dad won't mind me sharing that when I was a child or maybe a teen, my dad, and I think he still does, he preferred women's jeans. He just likes the cut. And I remember, so that was in the 80s or 90s, he would get a fair bit of pushback or the orienting from the shopkeepers, like, sir, this is the women's section, or, simply getting eyeballed, or, And yet I suspect my dad wouldn't have been comfortable with the concept of patriarchy, but I really should ask him. Anyways, what I want to say is that this should not be a dividing issue or a dividing word. So the first thing, or the first shit I want you to start wiping off your brain is the false idea that the patriarchal world culture, which I'm going to call PWC for the rest of the episode because it's a bit of a mouthful for me. So the false idea that the PWC is anti-men. The PWC is actually a culture, and it's a culture that demands particular behavior from both men and women. And it demands women to be gentle, soft-spoken, pretty, vulnerable. And it demands men to be quite the opposite, to be strong, good providers, to be physical, to not show emotions, to not be vulnerable, etc. Basically, it's a whole bunch of shoulds and a whole bunch of learned behaviors, not only from our childhood, but from multiple generations. It is basically a culture in which we cannot be truly ourselves and, that's important, accept differences. Now, if you're a man and still listening to this podcast, chances are you're affected by the PWC, because the PWC says men should just toughen up and not try to stir shit up. It says, why would you ever want to talk about your shit? When in truth, that is what we all need. And men even more so than women. And so the reason why I choose this topic for my 4th episode, which is a scary topic, and I was procrastinating recording this episode, is because it's been on my mind quite a lot. Because I have a husband that considers himself somewhat feminist and anti-patriarchy, although he still doesn't like the word. And one who shares with his mates, that means friends for non-English or American listeners, more than the average guy. It's also because I coach a lot of women on relationship issues. And lately I've seen some kind of escalation in misunderstanding and disconnection. And what I think might be happening is that for a few decades now, women have been pointing out the injustice of the PWC and how it affects them, and taking actions to regain some of their powers. So we're seeing more, maybe it's just my my perception, but we're seeing more and more strong women. But the men, they feel stuck in the PWC and kind of lagging behind, kind of wondering, what is their role, place in this new world. Now, don't get me wrong. I do see the younger generations of men, like Gen Z and younger, getting interested in personal development and questioning what masculinity even means. But we, the Gen X, early Gen Y, which is my generation, are an in-between generation in which women are moving away from PWC, but their husbands feel kind of lost and left behind. Now, I'm not saying that they're helpless little birds that need to be mothered by their wives, not at all. But I do think that we strong women can, if we want, lead with compassion. In fact, I think the future of feminism and masculinity is one where we realize that we have similar issues that look polar opposites, but really are the same. We're all asked to stick to our boxes. We're taught to be afraid to get out of our boxes. The boxes of gender, the boxes of wealth, the boxes of race, etc. And the other thing that I want to get across is that I think it's important to not have an all or nothing thinking when it comes to changing our relationship to the PWC. The all or nothing thinking or behaviors is what I call binary thinking, and I believe it's a trademark of the PWC. And what I mean by that is not try to be perfectly anti-PWC or perfectly anti-racist or perfectly anti-colonialism or perfectly anti-capitalism. The key word here being perfectly. But rather gently, step by step, noticing and changing our ways. Instead of being like, oh, I do this, which is so PWC, so I'm a bad feminist. Because some women like to stay at home or like to go and pick up their kids. And some men love fixing things even if their wives can do it. And it's also about not holding it against each other. Like, oh, my partner never does that. He's so PWC. Because the reality is we're all conditioned by PWC, even women, even and especially me. And the same way most white people and people of color have internalized racism and colonialism, myself included. And that is because we've all been raised in the same social constructs. So we all need time and practice to decondition or deconstruct, as they say in French. Or even just time to figure out what it means. Somehow I've noticed recently, and that is true on other topics like the environment, that people who speak up about these topics are verbally attacked for not being perfect. Like the only people who would be allowed to talk about an issue are people who are perfectly dealing with it. Do you see what I mean? That sounds completely absurd to me. One, because nobody's perfect. So in theory, nobody should talk about anything. Not to mention that it propagates perfectionism, which is definitely going to be the topic of a podcast episode very soon. And secondly, it's kind of like saying, why does my doctor think she's telling me, or who my doctor thinks she is for telling me about being healthy when she still gets sick sometime? You know? So would you only take advice on health from someone who never gets sick? Anyways. So, of course, I want you to start wiping off the shit of PWC. But first, I want you to wipe the idea that anti-patriarchy or feminism is anti-men. And instead, spray some freshener and remember that it's all about learning to be yourself and accepting differences. Anti-patriarchy means anti-boxes, not anti-men. And remember, it's not an all or nothing practice. You can definitely be imperfect and compassionate, an imperfect and compassionate leader in the matter. Okay. I'll leave you with that for today. As usual, get in touch if you have any questions or comments about the topic. Talk to you soon. Bye. And if you want fresh wipes and actionable tips every single week in your inbox, you better get on my email list. It's called the Brain Wipes. Also, make sure to download the Mental Offload. It's my free ebook to learn how to start wiping things off your to-do list. It's been known to help people save precious time and energy. It's also been called what everybody's psychic butthole needs.